I'm just the warm-up act. Okay, just so you know. Good evening, everybody. I think I know everybody here, so I don't really need to introduce myself, but I hope everyone enjoyed the chance to share a meal together tonight. Wasn't that wonderful? So, my name is Lisa Malloy, and I'm a member of the Peacemaking and Social Justice Committee. And I welcome you to this program entitled Promote the Vote on the Importance of Voting in This and All Elections. Acknowledging that this may be the first time, or at least one of the first times, that we as a church have had a program that directly involved the political system, I wanted to say, first off, that we'll not be discussing political parties. And in addition, we thought it would be helpful to give some history on how we came to offer this program series. Yes. Last year, Peacemaking and Social Justice focused on and gave educational presentations on such issues as systemic racism, mass incarceration, and gun violence. We lifted up women, minorities, and LGBTQIA issues. And some of the feedback we received after these programs was, okay, we're more educated about the issues, but now what can we do to help alleviate these problems or support marginalized people? So the committee discussed possible options. Such as encouraging people to volunteer at local organizations that address these issues. But many of us already do that. The conclusion we reached was that advocacy and political involvement does more to help change the root causes of these problems. But some in our group wondered if it was a little too dicey to discuss politics because, let's face it, we as a society have become so polarized. We reached the conclusion that the only way to approach this was not through the lens of any political party, but rather through the lens of our faith, the teachings of Christ, and leaning on the wisdom and study of our denomination to instruct us. Reverend Jared Kerbel puts it this way: politics and government are what we humans do to order our common life. As Christians, nonpartisan, issue-focused organizing for change carves out a space where, guided by our values and virtues, we can constructively engage in advocacy for change in laws, policy, rules, and practices that order our common life. That gives us a broad overview of our role as Christians in politics and government, but what specifically does Jesus and our denomination say about government and politics? Over the years, the Presbyterian Church USA, using Scripture as a guide, has studied and developed statements of faith and policy papers that address many of these social political issues. We thought it would be helpful to take a few minutes to briefly review some of these, so we're going to do a short but very deep dive into the ocean of thought about the relationship between church and state, so buckle up. If you would like copies of any of the quotes that I use or information on how to access these policy papers, please talk to me after the presentation, but I have some of them laid out here. Back in 1983, the General Assembly adopted the paper Reformed Faith and Politics, which looked at and affirmed the history of Presbyterian political activism since the Reformation, stating that the Presbyterian strand of the Reformed Church has been continually involved in reforming society through prayer, preaching, organizing, and political action. It states that for Christians, the goal of political life is justice. And so I'll talk a lot about that last Sunday. And justice is the expression of God's commandment to love one another. It also contends that if our purpose is to love God and to help our neighbors know the love of God, our political ethics cannot be separate from our faith. As a disciple of Jesus Christ, we are both a citizen of this country and a citizen of the kingdom of God. And any public or private question concerning the ordering of our common life together through our government and laws must be filtered through our allegiance to Jesus, his values, virtues, and vision of human flourishing. Who can think of some of the examples of the Presbyterian Church political involvement over the centuries? Anyone, shout it out.
IPMN, Israel Palestine Mission Network.
Very good, that's
Gay and
right.
lesbian, Ordination of Gay and Lesbian.
Yep, how about even further back?
Civil rights and
The
voting.
civil rights in the South,
Civil
North and
rights,
South.
exactly, yep,
Were they
absolutely.
involved in
Civil War.
Women's suffrage?
Eventually, I'm not sure, I'm not sure exactly when, but even the American Revolution, the Presbyterian Church was involved with that, and obviously with abolitionist movement and so forth, so all the way up to the present time. So the next policy statement from 1988, and remember, these are getting kind of old now, you know? I mean, I looked at it and I wasn't thinking about that until I was like, oh my gosh, it's 2022. And this is entitled "God Alone is Lord of the Conscience," and it sums it up pretty nicely. It asserts it is a limitation and denial of faith not to seek its expression in both a personal and public manner, in such ways as will not just influence but transform the social order. Faith demands engagement in secular order and involvement in the political realm. The PCUSA not only teaches us how and why we should engage in politics, but has resources for any number of social and political advocacy issues, almost anything you can think of. And you can access them on the website, including things like climate change, voter suppression, poverty, gun violence, and many more. The PCU, finally, in 2008, the PCUSA Public Policy and Advocacy team published a policy paper entitled "Christian and Citizen," asserting that we are called to be involved in public life, which includes politics, laws, and government. But at the same time, we are not to have unconditional loyalty to the government or become a political party or an organ of the state. Rather, we are called to participate in political life with fellow citizens, even those who differ from us in our basic faith, in the search for common ground for the common good. I wanted to read the final paragraphs of this policy paper. And I apologize, it's very dense, so I'll try to read it a little slowly. So Presbyterians affirm a duty to witness to government based on a vision of the promised kingdom. We do so out of obedience to God's word and spirit as best we can understand and follow it. But we do not seek to capture or manipulate the coercive power of government to impose our religious vision on the whole society. We advocate our views about sound policy for the public as vigorously, specifically, and persuasively as we can, but we do not form a Presbyterian party. We seek to influence electoral and governmental choices and to make our voice heard and heeded in the political process, but we do not run our own candidates for public office. There is a theological basis for our reticence of avoiding direct political authority. The church compromises its calling to provide a vision of God's intended order by succumbing to the temptation to wield political power directly, just as the state subverts its calling if it seeks to become the final source of vision and meaning in society. All of that to say, we are called to participate in politics as both a Christian and as a citizen of our country. We are called to be issue-focused, working toward the common good with our fellow citizens, whether Christian or not. We are called to hold our government accountable. We are called to hold our church and denomination accountable with our ultimate allegiance to God, treading the line between advocating for sound policy without imposing our religious vision on the whole society. So, now that you have that background, tonight we have invited Deb Siamaka to speak to us about one of our most basic civic duties, voting. A former U.S. Marine Corps captain, manufacturing manager, and government teacher at Conestoga High School. She ran for PA State Representative in 2020 for the 168th District. She is currently Executive Director of the nonprofit organization Promote the Vote PA. Please join me in welcoming
Thank you so much. This is the clicker. So, just a little bit about my background. I've done a lot of different things in my life, but perhaps the most meaningful thing that I've ever done is to be a high school teacher and to teach government and politics at Conestoga High School. And actually, it kind of breaks my heart that I left teaching to run for office, and I'm no longer doing that. So this is the next best thing. So, thank you for having me. My husband was like, oh my God, you're gonna be in your element tonight. And I am, because, you know, I feel passionately about this, I guess you'd say almost like a civic religion that we've kind of neglected. And my mission tonight is to talk to you about the state of the US and Pennsylvania and some of the problems that we have, but also to offer hope. Because one of the things I hope I did as a teacher was to give kids the incentive to get involved and to do something. It's very easy if you watch enough of the horrible ads that are on TV and talk about what's going on in the country to be very disaffected and just to sit on the sidelines. But that's my mission, to tell you I think there is hope. So I'll start with the bad stuff first, I guess. One of the things I did was I taught AP Government and Politics, and I also taught Comparative Government. And when I taught Comparative Government, I compared the United States to other countries in the world. And a great resource to do that is a thing called the Freedom House. And it's actually an organization that was formed around World War II by Eleanor Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie. And what it did was it wanted to look at what are the characteristics that a free country should have, and do all the countries meet up with that standard. So asking you for participation here, if you could turn to the person next to you, where do you think the United States ranks? Like, what number are we on the most free countries in the world right now? I'll give you a second.
That's where we have no idea why.
Anyone want to take a guess here? Anybody out in the audience here?
10.
10? Okay, I heard 10.
20.
Like an
Give
auctioneer.
me a number.
I said 50.
50? Okay. 20?
20.
15? 15?
30.
Okay.
Yeah, we were
Let me show you. So,
and the answer is
Oh, 61.
Yes. 61st.
How do you say that?
That's a lottery.
So-
Yeah.
So,
Where they get the plant.
So if you go to the
Yeah.
Freedom House website, if you go to the Freedom House website, you can see, and this has changed. I began teaching comparative government back in 2000, and we were about 15th. And so over the last 20 years, we have plummeted. And it's because of a number of different reasons, but part of it is our elections and the way that they've been run or not run, and mischaracterized, and also civil rights and civil liberties. So there's something like 90 different characteristics that countries get evaluated on, but we're right down there with like, let me look here. Let's see, like Panama. So, it's not, what's bad is it's the trend. The trend is going in the wrong way, so that's not a
out
good
of how many?
But there
who's the top?
are over 200 countries, like Norway, the Scandinavian countries tend to be the freer countries that have the most civil liberties and the most political freedom.
So which is number one there? Is it Norway?
I think it's Norway, yeah.
We should go to Sweden.
So, secondly, so now that I've told you what's going on with Freedom House, do you think that the country is going in the right direction right now.
Oh,
I mean, I would say, if you look at the Gallup polls recently, most people would say that we're headed in the wrong direction. And it's easy to be cynical about, where we're headed, but, if you looked at this and you think we're headed in the wrong direction, turn to the person next to you. Who do you think, if you had to blame, like point the finger, who's at fault here?
The voter. We allowed that.
Anyone want to shout out some, raise your hand, why do you think we're headed in the wrong direction? Raise your hand, say. Newt Gingrich. Some people would point that, yes,
I would say the Patriot Act.
Patriot Act
Oh.
after 9/11 and, taking away some civil rights, civil liberties that people had. Yes, Donald Trump. Donald Trump,
Someone has.
thank you.
Willing to do almost anything, he's broken a lot of norms, political norms.
And
Anyone else?
Rules.
I also, we were discussing that
Yes.
it's really all of us.
Yeah.
It's all of us not educating ourselves, it's like, I mean, how can you blame Donald Trump? He's never been a secret. His beliefs and his, so the country made that choice.
So people made that choice, so it's citizens themselves should have done a better job maybe researching
CNA
these
you can
guys.
vote for, and it's like you vote for them because you heard of them, and it's because they just got out of jail and they had the front page because they were corrupt.
Yeah, so you run in there and
So you go, oh, that sounds, I remember
So you-
that name.
You do it on name recognition.
Right, yeah.
Yes,
Well, even if you really take it all the way back, it's the way that the country was set up, because it was set up to keep the white European male in power. So like the women didn't have any rights, and certainly black people didn't have any rights, and anybody who didn't fit into that particular aristocracy didn't.
so you're saying that the actual structure, the actual institutions of
Part of it,
government
yeah.
are set up this way that maybe in some ways have led us on the wrong path.
Exactly.
Especially with the.
So that sounds
emphasis on originalism.
Right, so some of this, it may not be all of our fault, is that there are structures that are leading us in the wrong direction.
That's
Yeah.
really John Winthrop and the Puritans.
And my parents would say it's because we stopped teaching civics. And now I believe that they're right.
Well, I was a big believer, and I taught government, and which is today's civics, for 20 years at Conestoga. And when I first started, it was a half-year course, then we made it a full-year course. So I do think there are a lot of people who are not all that informed. I've talked to them.
But there are
Yeah.
places that are. My school that I taught in Southwest Philadelphia, in South Philadelphia, we had a very big civics program there. We had the Rendell Center come in, they did mock trials, they did all of this.
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny, because when Donald Trump was elected, I had this crazy sixth grade class, first thing in the morning, and one girl runs out to me and says, "It's all right, Miss Furlong, there's a balance of powers."
Yeah, I've got some of those stories too, but here's the thing, in my personal belief, yes, one of the problems we have is that a lot of adults were never taught this when they were younger, or a lot of the way that it was taught was memorization and regurgitation instead of actual active participation. Because to me, the thing that I always said to kids was, government's not a spectator sport. It's just not. But we've set it up that way, that we become passive, takers of the information rather than actually becoming, part of the solution. And so I think that it's not just the information, it's how this whole thing is set up. So is there a crisis in America? I'm just gonna go through a few things here that show you that there really is a crisis in America. Trust in government has declined from 74% when Kennedy was president in 1960 to in 2019, 19% trust in government. But I mean, I think you can see why that's happened. If you have politicians 24/7 saying Washington stinks and the government stinks, I mean, this is what you get. And you can see what the most precipitous drop in government trust was after Watergate with Nixon. I mean, that's really when most of that happened. But recently, we've had another precipitous drop, and this was since George W. Bush to the present. And you really can't drop much lower than this, you know? 59% of people don't trust their neighbors, right, to make the right political decisions. And although the one optimism here is that 84% of Americans do think that this can be fixed, that this trust issue can be fixed if we work together to solve this partisanship problem. Another problem in America that has divided us and set us on the wrong path, if you look at the economy, right, from 93 to 2017, the bottom 99% of the US population and incomes grew by only 15.5%, while the incomes of the top 1% grew by 95.5%. So there's been a massive, diversion of incomes, something that we really haven't seen since before the Progressive Era, in the robber barons of the late 1800s, right? And if you look just at this current midterm spending, right, 9.3 billion with a B, $billion being spent right now. I mean, you're being subjected to it because we're one of the states that's getting the most spending in America, and most of it's going towards television, right? So, and why is that? Because we have almost an absolute right to free speech, and the Supreme Court has said that money is speech. So right now, the way that our laws are set up and the way they're being interpreted by the Supreme Court, there's almost no way to stop this unlimited money.
Right, that's
It's a big problem. My heart with voting here, right? The US right now is 26th in percentage compared to other OECD nations in voting. And obviously, you know this, our voting tends to be higher in presidential elections. It was higher than 60% in our last presidential election, but it averages 60% for presidential, and it's 40% for midterm election. And what's worse is the thing that most affects us, our local elections, but we hover between 15 to 20% of people voting in our local elections. And, we know the reason behind this. There are a lot of barriers that prevent people from voting. You have to affirmatively go out and register to vote. We don't have automatic registration, right? In many, many states now, you have to get an ID. And I know, for example, my mother was adopted. She's trying right now to get an ID or a birth certificate from Massachusetts. First of all, it's going to cost her money. Secondly, she's trying to figure out the court system up in Massachusetts to find this document. So we have created these barriers, especially for older people who don't have the ID documents, to set this up for failure. And then poor people, I don't know about you, but I remember when Obama ran in 2008, I was living in Chester County in Schuylkill Township. There was a 2-hour wait to vote. 2 hours. If you work in a minimum wage job and you have kids, how do you take that time off to go vote, right? And so what happens? We develop apathy, right? People, even if they want to vote, so many barriers are set up that this becomes a real problem. And what we see is the largest vote in most elections, and that's what this map is showing you, is people who don't vote at all. That's the largest vote. There are people who are not registered, who have checked out of the system. They're not voting at all. And so it's worse than the 60 to 40%. Those are the people who are eligible. Then there are people who never got into the system to begin with. So our voting compared to other countries is really not good.
Some people, some countries,
I'm sorry, yes,
some countries you're required to vote.
right, Australia,
You get fined.
that's right, you get fined, that's right, Australia is one of them, and they've actually had pretty good success with getting people to vote.
Yeah.
Because, and the fine actually, you know, it's not a very big fine, but just the idea that it's become part of the norm in Australia to vote, it affirmatively reinforces the idea that we should vote. I used to be a speaker for Fair Districts, Pennsylvania. You know, the thing that I was fighting for in 2016 was getting a nonpartisan commission in Pennsylvania to draw the line. You know, it's very difficult to draw these lines completely fairly, but almost every state in America, that one political party or the other are drawing these lines, right, to garner votes for that particular political party, because it's the politicians who draw these lines. I'm sure you've seen this before, but you can take a district and you can make it with the same voters. You can make it so that it always comes out blue or it always comes out red. Almost, I mean, if people vote, you know, somewhat aligned with their political parties. And, you know, when I used to teach this to kids, they're like, this can't be. This is not, I mean, this isn't right. I mean, in a way, this sort of happened to me. I ran in 2020. I was going to run in 2022, but I live in media, and I was in the 168th district. They drew a line so that my house was no longer in the 168th district, so I couldn't run anymore in that district. I'm now in Jen O'Mara's district in the 165th. Anyway, so distorted representation is another thing that has set us on a bad path. And then combine all that with, the good news is that you here are kind of like going against this norm here, which is a fragmented and decaying civil society, right? And the famous book that goes along with this, I don't know if you've ever read this book or a section of it, Robert Putnam from Harvard years ago wrote this book called Bowling Alone. And he said, you know, back in the day, we came together, we bowled in leagues, belonged to the Lions Club, belonged to the Rotary Club. We created these bonds between people who might not be politically aligned at all. And so that was one of the ways that our civil society created fabric that brought us together. And today, you know, if we bowl at all, I don't know, I can't remember the last time I bowled, but you know, we do things more alone, right? And so we don't have those same groups that bring us together and create a fabric in our society. And the thing that we talk about here is social capital. You know, a set of shared values that makes us a united community or a united country. And what they found is there are, actually the Northeast has pretty good social capital, and parts of the Midwest have pretty good social capital. But there are large parts of the country where we really have very little social capital at all. Churches actually are the number one place where we get social capital. And like I said, you're doing that right now. And then on top of everything else, you know, when I got my master's degree in political science, I focused on the media. My undergraduate degree is in journalism, and I cry for the fact that our local newspapers and our local media has almost, if it hasn't disappeared, what's left is just not very good. And 1,800 newspapers gone out of business. Many counties don't have a local newspaper, so who's covering what's happening at the local level in our local politics? The school board, the supervisor, the board of elections, right? It's the bad thing here is we talked about education and the fact that, you know, we're making bad decisions as citizens, but what if it's almost impossible to find out what's going on in an election? From my personal standpoint, when I ran for state rep, I begged the local newspaper to try to get coverage, and I got practically no coverage at all until the day before the election. So if you're a person trying to vote intelligently, how do you know who you're voting for if you can't actually get information for this? So what's replacing it? The wild, wild west of social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and in many cases, these have become cesspools of bad information, you know, and attacks on people for actually speaking their mind. And so because of this, we have a lack of shared commitment to democracy. 46, this just blew me away as a former Marine Corps officer, right? Like the fact that, and you know, and not to go on and on about this, but you know, I was in a long time ago, one of my friends was killed in Grenada, he was a helicopter pilot. And I always used to tell the students that I taught at Conestoga, if you don't vote, Mrs. Siamaka is gonna hover over you like this ghost and just like come down on you like a ton of bricks, because people gave their life so that you have the right to vote, right? But now we're saying 46% of Americans think that another form of government besides democracy is okay? How is that possible?
I just had someone
Right?
recently tell me that he thought a benevolent dictator would be a good idea. And I went, well, how do you find a benevolent one?
Because they're benevolent too, based on what? Based on what ideas, right? And so I think, you know, people don't even know what it means right now to have a democracy or to be civically engaged or what to do to get this country back to a point where most of us think that a democracy is the only kind of government that we should have. So we need to have commitment to each other about this idea of a shared democracy. So, how do we fix this thing? If you look at America, and not to get too politically sciencey thing, you know, our country was based not on any one religion, and you said that in the, I listened. You know, it wasn't based on any one religion, it wasn't based on any one ethnic group, but there are many countries today that are based on those, like Iran, or even Japan has pretty homogeneous
Homogeneity.
Anyway, our country is based on a set of ideals that brings us together. And there's a name for that. It's called civic nationalism. It's unlike ethnic nationalism. But it only works if we have a shared set of ideals, and they're all listed in the Constitution, which many people say that they have read. Bargain that many of them have not actually opened the document and read those. So if we can't agree what our shared values are, do we have a country anymore? And that's, I think, this is a big question. You know, we have a country based on the Constitution and the ideals of the Constitution, but if because of social media and this polarization, we each really have our own interpretation of what those ideas are, we really don't have the cohesiveness to be able to go on together as a country. So what should we do?
Before you leave that,
Yeah.
would you lump Christian nationalism in the same class as ethnic nationalism?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially, look at Iran. Iran is an ethnically nationalistic country because, you know, Islam is the thing that they throw out a monarchy and they brought in an Islamic government. Same thing here. If you believe that we should have a completely Christian country, then you're changing the rules of the game. The original rules were these values are found in the Constitution. Now you're saying these values are found in Christianity. And the problem with that is, you know, one of the good things about the Statue of Liberty and the fact that people could come from other countries and anybody could become an American was, it didn't matter whether you were Jewish or Christian or Muslim or, you know, Baha'i. Anybody could become an American. And so if we change the rules of the nation now and say you have to be Christian, we're changing to become an ethnically nationalistic country based on the values of Christianity. And I disagree that that's what our country was based on. Yeah.
I also more and more take a lot of issue with what's being called Christian. I mean, there are groups that I don't even recognize that call themselves Christian.
Right.
And I don't think that when they get their government that I'm gonna be included.
with that, and that's a problem. I mean, I think I heard some of that in the statement from, the Presbyterian Church, is that, we don't want to exclude people in our country based on their religion. We want it to be a welcoming country, and I think, personally, I think that they're subverting the original ideals of the country, and you're right. Whose Christianity is the Christianity that we're going to accept, too? But a problem besides this is that the United States government is set up to be fractured. If you read the Federalist Papers, right, that were written, this is on purpose. They fractured the government between, federal, state, and local, and we also fractured it between the three branches because the idea was we didn't want any one person or group to take over the country. But what we found here is, you can see all the different levels of government, and there's 3,000 county governments and 19,000 city governments, and there's all these 16,000 towns. There's a lot of different entities, and people throw their hands up and say, how do I get anything done if I have to deal with all these different kinds of groups? And one of your problems is, too, you have all these powerful groups with lots of money and lots of power, lots of lobbyists, right? The NRA, the NEA, the Chamber of Commerce, Amazon, powerful people like, Bill Gates and Donald Trump and, lots of other people who are powerful that can access this government by spending a lot of money and getting in there and having their voice heard, right? So how do we fight this? Do we just throw our hands up and say it's just a mess and, we can't fight it?
But I only get one vote.
I think, and you kind of alluded to this in your introductory remarks, if we don't participate in politics, then we abdicate power to people who have the ideals or the desire to change things for themselves. And so oftentimes people will say power, or kids will say this to me like in a class, power, that's so, I'm not into power, it's terrible, right? But, we need power to be able to make the change that we see and that we need and that is for good, right? But there's lots of ways to get power, right? You can have money, you can have wealth, the government has power through its laws and social norms, and even coming up with ideas like Martin Luther King coalescing, African Americans through, the civil rights movement. And the last way is through numbers, right? By having a lot of people who come together and say, enough is enough. I mean, this works. We're even seeing this in Iran right now. I mean, Iran, right, where like it's so repressive, and the government, the supreme leader, has rule over everything. But people are coming out in the streets and they're saying, enough is enough, right? We are not going to allow women to be killed on the streets of Iran. That's what we need. We need people to move from apathy to numbers, right? To change the way that, by the way, I'll show some sources for you, but this is a great book if you want to read a great book. This guy is a professor at Tufts. He wrote this book called Politics is for Power, and basically talks about how change begins in small groups, like your group, and how you can use that as leverage to change the society and change the world. So why do you want power? A tyrant wants power, selfishly, because they want things for themselves, right? They want to change the world for themselves. But power plus character equals a citizen, a great citizen, right? I mean, my hero here, right? John Lewis, right? When you see something that's not right, that's not fair, that's not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something, you have to do something. Because to stand by in the face of injustice is to tacitly approve that injustice. And more than anything, to me, that's the affirmative action we have here to do something. I mean, I know we can't do everything, but when I see something that's awful, I don't know about you, I just get so worked up about it. And then I think, I can't just be worked up about it. I can't just watch television and say I'm worked up about it. I've got to do something about this. Even if it's something small, even if it's a phone call, right? You've got to do something. That makes a great citizen, and that's character. To my mind, right? Democracy is a verb, right? Democracy means action. And we, and I even say teachers have been part of this, it's not just memorizing how a bill becomes a law. It's not memorizing the structure of the Constitution and how Congress works. It means going out there and using your voice to do something. It's a verb. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what I've done. I don't know, somehow I wound up being a rabble-rouser my whole life, but I'm old enough. When I was a kid, you may have read these books, Silent Spring, about, the environment and birds and animals being killed by DDT and those things. The Other America, which is Michael Harrington's book about poverty. I read these when I was a kid, and it just infuriated me. And what I realized was that you can actually make a difference. People would pat me on the head and I'd write letters to my congressman. But I realized that's, kind of cool. People started listening to me, And maybe I didn't make change every time, but I did, I read about the Endangered Species Act and how that what didn't look like it was going to pass. And lots of little kids wrote letters to their congressman and said, we've got to pass this. And now that's one of the most successful acts in U.S. history. It saved so many animals from being, wiped out in the United States, right? During the Vietnam War, I was a kid, and I can remember the day Kent State happened. I went downtown. I lived in Massachusetts at the time, and I was polling my neighbors, like, what do you think about Kent State? Like, I was outraged that had happened, right? I know I personally didn't make a difference about what happened, but I got people to think about, what had happened with Kent State. I wore, interestingly, as a future Marine Corps officer, I wore an anti-war, armband to school, and some kids were thrown out of school. In our school, we were radical Massachusetts, I guess. But I wore a black armband to school. If you read the case Tinker versus Des Moines, right? It now it's legal. It's free speech to wear something like that. But it was kind of radical to wear, a black armband. And I remember knocking on doors for Humphrey at the time. That was my first foray into politics. I can remember questioning my teachers. My mother died of cancer many years ago. And I couldn't understand why all this money was going to NASA for orange juice. Was that Tang? Tang. And when I thought there should be more money for cancer funding. I think questioning authority figures is a good thing, right? Make them defend what they believe. At Penn State, I did a documentary film on hazardous waste disposal in Pennsylvania and how, trucks were just dumping this noxious chemicals like TCE onto our water systems. And actually, we had the Melvin Wade dump site in Philadelphia, which blew up and killed several firefighters. Companies back in the day just dumped chemicals everywhere, and they got into our water supply. When I was in the Marine Corps, I showed up to Camp Pendleton, and I had to live in the bachelor quarters until my husband arrived. And I can remember sitting there eating my dinner, and these dancing girls came out with very, very little clothing on. And I thought, this is ridiculous, this is horrible. And, there weren't too many women Marine Corps officers in when I first went in. And I wrote my letter to the general, and got in a little bit of trouble for writing a letter to a general and just going up there, but they stopped the dancing girls, right? Because it was so sexist and awful that we should have to watch this kind of stuff. And, I could go on and on here, but the thing that I did most recently is, when the Parkland shooting happened, I was very upset and talking about this with my kids at Conestoga, and they said to me, Mrs. Siamaka, why is it Second Amendment rights are protected and people fight for those, but no one protects our right to live in this classroom without being shot? And then I started to organize teachers to fight back against arming teachers in the classroom and also protecting kids in the classroom. What could we do? And that's actually how I wound up, I wrote an article for Time Magazine about that, and I wound up running for state representative basically because of that issue. I'm not saying you have to do that and run for state legislature. I just think that too often we think we don't have a voice to stand up and say things are going in the wrong direction, that you can. So how do we take action to change our community and change the direction of the country? So in researching this, and I actually had read about this a couple of years ago, there are so many people working on this. And one of the best ideas that I've heard is this idea called Civic Saturday. And there's a place called Citizen University. And you can look this up online. But basically what they're trying to do is get communities to come together to talk about their problems in a safe space in which we bridge the gap between our different politics and we talk together. And they've done this in 75 different cities across America. I challenge you to take a look at this, right? I'm actually thinking of going to a training for this, but it's a way to get back to our shared values that I think we have lost. And we need to transcend our boundaries to be able to talk to each other again. After the 2016 election, I had so many kids at Conestoga who were shoved up against lockers, Mexican kids told to go back to Mexico, Black kids called the N-word, gay kids treated horribly. And a lot of these kids came to me and said, Mrs. Siamaka, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden everything's changed here. I actually invited, it used to be, it's Braver Angels now, Better Angels was what it used to call. And I brought them in to have parents, 12 Democratic parents and 12 Republican parents, sit in front of hundreds of kids and talk about their differences in a moderated discussion. And the whole idea here is to listen without judgment and bring people together. And it's a great model. It was really eye-opening because the kids got to see parents process, and they had to do it in a way that wasn't obnoxious because they knew it would be horrible if they had fights in front of their kids, right? So some very revealing things came out during these discussions, and I just thought, what a great way to transcend our differences by moderating this kind of a discussion. And that's actually a model that you might want to think about here. Specifically, back to promote the vote, what can you do specifically regarding voting? We need poll workers in Delaware County. You can go to the Board of Election website, and you can see that you can sign up if you want to work an election, right? Attend meetings. You know, so many of these meetings, nobody goes to them, and because there's no local newspaper really reporting on them, who knows what happens there, right? You could start going to these meetings and report them to other people about what's going on. Support local candidates who have no money, no hope, right? They just go out there on their own and do these kind of things. Find good people and help them to run. And, you know, call up the Delco Times and some of these other local newspapers and say, hey, why aren't you covering the Board of Elections? Or why aren't you covering these meetings, right? You've got to do a better job at getting information to all our citizens. For me, for voting, someone asked me like, so why did you form this promote the vote thing? It's because I remember the good old days when you just went and voted and the vote counted and there was no like CRAP about your vote counting, right? That's why I'm advocating right now and I'm watching what's going on across the state with voting regulations because a lot of people are trying to undermine the elections by coming up with a lot of ridiculous, like for example, this one drives me nuts. They want people to sit there and analyze your signature to see if your signature matches your original voter registration card. Well, I don't know about you, but my signature has changed a lot. I don't want somebody who knows nothing about signatures throwing my signature out and my ballot out. That's the kind of thing I'm watching for, right? So I think we need more early voting, right?
No,
I think we need, here's a thought. If people don't have the time or the money to vote, why don't we make Veterans Day a holiday to honor
Yes.
our veterans and honor our right to vote and give people the opportunity to vote. Why don't we make voter registration automatic, right? And why don't we pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds and teach them what it's like to go to the polls, right? And explain to them something which is a completely foreign concept to them. Well, how do you do this? You demand it of your state representative. They're the ones who make these voting laws. You write letters to the editor, right, and get them published. You attend these hearings, and you join organizations like my organization, or the ACLU, or the League of Women Voters, and you show up and you demand that this happens, because numbers matter. They really do. So in the end, right, what makes us part of this country? What makes us citizens? Really, when you think about it, we ask citizens to do almost nothing. We don't really even have to, I mean, kids have to register for the Selective Service still, but really, we don't have a draft. Most people try to get out of jury duty, and a lot of people don't even want to pay their taxes, right? But citizenship is gained by meeting the legal requirements. And in essence, they're expected to obey the laws and defend it against its enemies. But really, in fact, what do we ask? Almost nothing, right? So if you go to the Citizen University, what they're trying to do is to get people to recommit to being American citizens, to take the oath, right? I'm not going to ask you to do this today unless you want to, but I do believe, right? Because there's no affirmative way to commit to being a citizen, we need to do something that makes us all part of this great American, experiment. We need to get back to that. Some people, call this a civic religion. I think we do need the passion that we all have for the country to come together in some type of a civic religion so that we recommit to what it's like to be an American. All over again. I know it's probably later than you think. Do you have any questions or comments?
A question, maybe you're looking for a comment rather than an answer.
Yeah.
I often write to my Congress people, and I always get a canned answer. And so the question is it doing any good to write?
Well, first of all, I will say, handwritten letters are way better than typed letters or emailed letters, specifically. I will say, funny story is I had my kids write letters to President Obama. They were all angry about the Health Act that that Michelle Obama passed, which took all the junk food out of schools. So they were furious. I said, you know what? You can write a letter to President Obama. So they did. And they got these letters back that had Bo the dog's footprints on them. They must have thought they were younger kids or whatever. But they were so thrilled that they got this letter back. But I will say that you're right. So many of these are handled by low-level staffers. First of all, they respond to deluges, handwritten letters, and also phone calls. They actually add up. They add up the phone calls. So I often pick up the phone. I had Santorum on speed dial. Right. And Toomey. Actually, I was at Toomey's office. I went with Moms Demand Action Against Guns. This was just a few months ago. And they wouldn't let me in. But they had a staffer come out and spoke to me. But so I'm a firm believer in handwritten letters and phone calls. But part of what, if you go to the Citizen University about ideas to reinvigorate the country, one of the things they talk about is for example, Mary Gay Scanlon has 750,000 people in her district, right? It's way too big. They recommend that we increase the size of the House of Representatives to bring that number down. They also think that 4 or 5 times a year, there should be like a random group of citizens who are pulled from her district, right? And actually she would have a meeting with them. Because right now, and she doesn't hide, but like so many of the representatives never meet with people and actually talk to real people in their districts. So I think that you're right, there's a lot of problems because there's too many people in the district.
Just have a comment, I remember League of Women Voters, and people may not know, but men and women can be members, family members, you can have a family membership, and I strongly advise, there's an active group in Delaware County and a lot of interesting events,
Yes.
and they're dedicated to nonpartisanship, so
Yes.
that's,
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and they've had some great online discussions with like the Board of Elections, and I think they just had Terry Madonna on there.
so thank you
So
for
they've
mentioning that.
they've had some really good speakers. Yes, sir.
There's some countries on the top of the democracy, so Norway or something like that. Is there anything lesson from those countries how they keep on in the top ranks?
I mean, what you see is that a lot of them are smaller countries, you know. I think we have it's a very unwieldy democracy that we have. I mean, we have such a big country, and this was discussed, you know, at the beginning of our country. Can this democracy succeed because it's so big? And I do think that's a problem. It almost has become too unwieldy. And I think what you're seeing, like for example, with this gentleman, is that people feel like their voice is not being heard. But in a smaller country, it's easier to get your voice to be heard. So you know, I'm not recommending that they break the country apart into smaller groups, but I think we do need to find a way to get more citizen participation and voices being heard, and not just the voices of the big money people. So I think that's definitely a problem. Yes, Christine.
So for years and years, I have done what you are advocating, which is you listen carefully, you don't pass judgment. Just because I believe this doesn't mean you have to believe this. But over the last years, I have found myself unable to do that any longer. Things have shifted and changed. And I cannot listen to what I know is a destructive, harmful lie and not confront that.
Yeah.
How do we do what you're asking us to do today?
Well, I would say if you go to Braver Angel's website, they have a bunch of different questions that are very good at eliciting. Well, for most people, are eliciting discussion. Last year, because I thought I was running this year, I actually knocked on 1,000 doors of Republicans and Independents in Delaware County, and for the most part, I mean, I had some horrible experience, I will say. I had one guy, I actually thought he might kill me. Like, he actually slammed the door in my face and screamed at me. I shouldn't reinforce the bad part, but basically what he said was, "You're the teacher." And I said, "Yes, I'm a teacher." He said, "You're the one that wants to destroy my textbooks and the way that I was taught and my history." I said, "No, sir, that's not what I did. When I was a teacher, I tried to bring in everyone's voice and let the kids make the decision. So I brought in documents. Like, for example, I didn't know till just recently about the whole Tulsa massacre. Right. I said that to him. And he got so angry with me just by me saying that and talking to him about that. I mean, when he basically took the door and, like, honestly, almost took my head off because I didn't realize he was going to do that. So that was the negative part about that. So I agree with you. There are people who are just, there's no way. It's not gonna work. But you know what? I talked to people that I actually was able to make, some difference with, I think. And I'll give you an example. I talked to a woman. She was in Middletown. She says to me, "You don't want to talk to me. I'm a Trump supporter." And I said, "No, I do want to talk to you because I want to understand like where you're coming from. I really don't understand like where you're coming from." And she said, "Well, I've had a miserable life. I really have had an awful life. Two of my sons died from drug opioid overdoses. And I said to her, and this is true, like I have a nephew right now who's in Kensington. He's on the streets of Kensington, and he's a heroin addict. And we started talking about how awful opioids are and how destructive they are. And I talked to her for a good half an hour. And if you'd asked me initially, I thought she might punch me in the face initially. And, you know, I don't know if she would have voted for me, but I do feel like I made a difference, you know? And it's so hard. The problem is, this is really, really hard. I also feel like I made a difference when I had the 12 Republican parents and the 12 Democratic parents. And what they did was, the 12 Democrats sat in one group, and the 12 Republicans sat in another, and they talked about why they were Democrats or why they were Republicans. And the other group had to sit there and listen to what they said without commenting. And then not until the very, very end did we pair Republicans and Democrats together, and they had to listen to each other. And they came away, I mean, I don't think we didn't change any political parties, but they came away with an understanding, you know, of where the people weren't just, you know, maniacs. That there was some, you know, reason why they had these positions that they did. So there's no magic bullet. I mean, there's definitely not. But I know I learned to get better at just, here's what I would do. I would say, knock, knock, knock. My name's Deb Simaco. I ran for state rep last year. Because of the pandemic, I really didn't get to listen to you or to talk to you. I just want to hear what you think about what's going on in the world. You don't want to hear what I have to say. And I'd say, no, I really do. And they would say things like, you know, immigrants are ruining this country. And I'd say, oh. I said, I don't think that, but I'd love to hear why you think that. And then they would, you know, give me, some of it was crazy nonsense. You know, I would be honest with you, but some of them did. I mean, there was a point of like, huh. Or they would say some statistic, and I'd say, well, that's not what I've read. So I would just say things like that, not to like shoot them down, but just to say, I haven't heard that. And a lot of times it worked. A lot of times it didn't. But I think, that's why I think that Civic Saturday is a good thing, because I think we need a mechanism to bring people together because there aren't these opportunities that we used to have.
Well, God bless you for going out and telling people and educating people and coming here and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And
You know what? You know why I believe so firmly in this? Because what else do we have?
yeah.
I'm serious. I mean, I seriously believe that. What else do we have but possibly like civil war? And I just don't. That's not the country I want to live in, and that's not the country I want my son to live in, and my nieces and nephews to live in. So if they're, you know, maybe I'm like, you know, I don't know. Pissing into the wind or inappropriate, but I maybe if I can make one small difference, I think what's easy to, and last thing I'll stop because I know everyone wants to go home, but one thing, do one thing.
Yeah.
Don't be so overwhelmed that the world's falling apart that you can't do anything. Just do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,